Let us go to May 18th of 1980. There were two things taking place in the United States that were pretty big stories. Over on the West Coast, you have Mount St. Helens erupting, right? And remember we talked about the guy, Harry Truman, not the president, but there was a man named Harry Truman that lived on Mount St. Helens, and they kept telling the man, hey, you might want to get off, it's about to blow up, and I'm not leaving, I've been here for however many years, I'm not scared of the volcano, and then literally, he was pretty much vaporized when the pyroclastic flow showed up. But 3,000 miles away on the other side of the country, very far to the south, Miami Metro, you have Liberty City, which is burning. And so the question becomes why? Why is the city burning? Why is everybody, because this is a 7-day riot. People are like, I'm sick of this. What triggered all that? So then we go into the layers and the details because, again, when we talk about a cycle, there are many components. It's not just about feelings that people have towards celebrities, but it's about everything that affects black people collectively. So let's jump into it. When you talk about a city like Miami, Miami was a city that was redlined just like pretty much every major metropolitan city in this country, whether it be LA, Seattle, Portland, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, St. Louis, New York, Boston. You can name any city, there is evidence of redlining somewhere. Baltimore, it doesn't matter which city, every city was redlined pretty much. That's pretty much what laid out America. So Miami at that point in time was a very, very segregated city. It was to the point where up until the 1950s, black people could not own or operate any businesses in downtown Miami. Not at all. And even when you get into the 1960s, there was an area called Hialeah where pretty much if you were a black person that worked in that side of town in the 1960s, you needed a special pass to be on that side of town. Kind of like apartheid in South Africa where you had to have a pass to go to certain segments of town and you had to have it on you at all times, or of course you would be stopped by the police. In addition to that, there was also a wall that was built to keep the city segregated. Black folks lived in their portion, white folks lived in their portion. And so, of course, for this current system that we're describing to work and operate smoothly, there needed to be enforcement. And so when you dig into the early origins of Miami, especially in the early 1900s, when you talk about the 1920s, in order to be on the police force, you had to have associations with the Klan. No associations with the Klan, you can't be a cop, right? And that would be something that would last up until the 1940s and 50s. But even by then, the practices and the traditions that would have come out of those police forces are now embedded and institutionalized within that force. Because think about it, if you have the Klan on the force, who's policing the Klan? No one. So of course, the idea of terrorism against black Americans, because remember, 1920s, if we just talk about 1919, which was a year of lots of what you call uprisings against black people by white mobs. That was just in 1919. We get to 1920s, and again, you have the Klan who literally runs the police department. They have free reign to do whatever they want. So when it came to enforcing those rules and making sure that black folks stayed on their side of town, it was what it was. And mind you, this is not the Miami that we see today where it's a bit more diverse and you have different populations represented from all these different countries. Miami wasn't that yet. It was very black and white at that point in time, right? So anyway, getting back to my redlining conversation, there was an area called Overtown. Overtown is where the black folks lived, all right? However, Overtown was actually a thriving community, all right? They had their own booming economy. They had all these businesses and black professionals and their own doctors and schools and grocery stores and everything else like that. Kind of like its own version of Tulsa for Miami. You know what I mean? We've talked about, and everybody's talked about Tulsa, Oklahoma, but there were lots of different cities all across the United States where black people collectively had their own town where they pretty much operated and owned the means of operation. And so those towns would flourish, and of course, white anger, white mobs would go and burn those things down. As we got into the 1950s, instead of burning them down, there was another thing that came in that kind of took away those neighborhoods. Development. So, 1959, there is a man named Luther Brooks. And Luther Brooks owns a whole bunch of everything. Like, he's rich, right? And so he figures, we need to expand into Miami. Like, we need to go up to that northern side, because pretty much that's where Overtown is, right? I was watching Living Single the other day, that's why I said Overton. But anyway, they want to expand. We need to expand. And so at the same time, what's happening in the United States as we come into the 1950s, right? You have the creation of the interstate freeway systems, right? I-95 runs from Florida to Maine, right? And so they decide, well, in order to develop Miami, we need to, make sure that we have access to I-95 so people can get to these new areas that we want to develop because, we want to have more businesses and we want to become a big tourist city and, have people coming in from California and from Nebraska and from Utah just to come see how great our city is. And so we're going to go ahead and expand I-95. Where does I-95 end up being built? Right smack on top of Overtown, which means we need to now go ahead and displace a bunch of people. And usually in an ideal world, when there's some kind of development or some kind of project going on and the developers or the business owners need a specific plot of land but it's occupied by someone else, they usually go to that community or to that owner, whoever that tenant is, and say, hey, listen, we have this project we're doing and your property sits right smack in the middle of our vision. So here's the thing. We're going to offer you this really great package deal of this amount of money to make sure that you're able to get on your feet and start over and continue living a prosperous life. And so how much do you want for the land? What's a deal that we can make? But oh no, not in this situation, because again, these are just black folks, so who cares? We'll just do anything to them. And so here comes that big monster called eminent domain. Understand, something like eminent domain has been weaponized against so many black communities all across this country. I did a video, it's one of my In the News episodes. It's one of the episodes where I talk about the Biden administration giving the bailout to disenfranchised farmers. Sorry, there's just so much we go through. I get all the titles mixed up. It's so much. The disenfranchised farmers, and mainly these were a lot of black farmers who were left out of even just the bailouts from the Trump administration because, one, they were not qualified as USDA farms, which is another conversation, another story. But anyway, in that video, we talk about how pretty much a lot of our malls, freeways, a lot of big projects were pretty much, they became a thing because of eminent domain. And so a lot of people became collateral to these projects. And so when it comes to eminent domain, it's your state and local government or federal government saying, hey, we see that you live here, but there's a project that is for the greater good of society, for the greater good of your area. And pretty much we're just going to bulldoze whatever you have because we're going to take that land. We might give you a settlement, but it's not going to be anything that's going to make you whole. It's not going to be anything that's going to put you into a space to leave you where you left off. You're probably worse off, and never mind your whole community and all that. We're taking all of that because, again, we need to build this freeway.
In an effort to correct blighted conditions, city lands are re-evaluated, and undesirable areas are leveled to the ground.
And so pretty much they build this freeway system and 20,000 residents of Overtown are displaced. That's 50% of the town. And let me tell you how trifling it was. The trifling part is they made sure to tear down 2nd and 3rd Avenue, okay? Those were the two streets where all the booming black businesses were in Overtown. That was all of the livelihood of the town. So think about what it would be like for the people who are still in Overtown who did not get bulldozed over, right? Literally, the livelihood and the commerce of the town is now gone. So there goes the investment. There goes the wealth that has been accumulated for the next generation that would grow up to live in Overtown. That also affects things like the property values, the property taxes, which indirectly will affect what's happening with how much money is going into the schooling. And so, long story short, they displaced 20,000 people and they pushed them into Liberty City. Right? So Liberty City pretty much at this point in time is still a very white section of town. Now, with the whole segregation, of course, they don't have people just all mixed together, but they're starting to put black people in pockets of Liberty City. So what do you think the white people started doing, right? White people are getting mad. What are you putting those people over here for? They're going to bring our property values down. And so here comes the white rage and also the white flight, something you'd also see as we came into the 1970s after the Fair Housing Act came into fruition. And so you started seeing black folks now able to move into different neighborhoods, and you saw white folks say, I'm not living with those people. I'm out of here. We're gone, right? And so Liberty City becomes this very interesting area where there's a lot of change taking place, because also understand Miami is shifting culturally, because now you're having new populations come into the area as we get into the 60s and the 70s. So you're starting to see a lot of Haitian families come into Liberty City. You're starting to see people from Jamaica coming in, people from Cuba, people from all these different places, Venezuela coming to the area. The area is getting more diverse. White folks are not having it. What are all these people doing up in here? And the crazy part is, even for those who were immigrating into the area, depending on how they looked, it would determine how they were treated, where they would live, and what opportunities that they would have. And so you get into the space of Liberty City, where now there's white rage. There's all these different populations that are starting to grow and try to flourish in these different areas. And again, we still have this policing system that hasn't gone anywhere. And now you incorporate that white rage and that fear of the unknown, which really isn't fear. It's just a conversation of fear of losing power. So we're going to pretend we're scared of the people that don't look like us. And so you, of course, get the more aggressive policing. Very aggressive, because again, these are now the children of former Klansmen or current Klansmen, and some of them are still in the Klan. These are the children of the racist Klan members. These are the children that are now the police, that are, you know, their dad was in the Klan, their dad was in whatever little movement. And even when you take the Klan out of the picture, like I said, the practices and ideologies and viewpoints are still there. And so now you get into the space where you have Liberty City and Overtown, two areas where, as you have the white flight, as you have the development that destroys what was already there, you lose the investment in both communities. What happens when there's no investment, when there's less stores, when there's less opportunity, when there's less things in regards to, access to education, access to good food, access to good healthcare, access to just freaking clean water. So you start to see the rise in crime and everything else like that. And so if there's a rise in crime, that means the police got to get even tougher. And so let's fast forward to where that leads us. Let's jump a generation. So we come to December 17th of 1979. There's a black man named Arthur McDuffie, former Marine, and he has just had a great time with all of his people. He's on the way home. It's 1:51 a.m. All right, he is 2 blocks from home. 2 blocks. He gets to the red light. No one's there. Light's taking too long. He's on his motorcycle. He's like, you know what? Nobody's looking. I'm gonna just go through the red light, right? So he goes through the red light, thinking nobody would see. Even pops a wheelie, living it up, right? Oh no. There was a police officer who saw him. So the police officer tries to stop him. He doesn't really stop. So he keeps going. There's this 8-minute pursuit. He eventually stops right before the freeway and is like, you know what? I don't want this smoke today. Gets out, hands up, gets off the bike. What do you think happened? Them police were like, oh, you ain't want to stop, huh? We gonna show you. And so you have 10 officers who beat this man unconscious. Now, mind you, while he was beaten, he was cuffed, face down on the ground. So he is beaten by these 10 officers. He dies from his injuries because he's beaten unconscious. What makes the story sketchy right away is that it took the police officers 4 hours, again, 4 hours, to report what happened to the lead internal investigator. Just understand, anytime the police kill somebody, they're supposed to inform the lead internal investigator because that's the way that the police are supposed to police themselves, right? And mind you, this lead internal investigator was also a black woman. And so what do you think happened in those 4 hours between this man dying and laying on the sidewalk and bleeding out and the lead internal investigator finally being informed about what just happened within their department? The police are putting together this story of what they're going to say happened. And so this was the story that they had. They said pretty much, yeah, we tried to stop him. He wouldn't stop. And so he crashed and, he hit his head and the helmet came off and he just skidded on the side of the road. And when we got there and tried to help him, he just got up and attacked us like a madman. Doesn't that story sound so familiar to many of the, as the sirens are going while I'm telling this is good optics. This is great. Keep it up. I don't know if y'all can hear that or not. But anyway, doesn't it sound just like many of the stories we've heard where the police say, oh, some act of God happened, but that person was so strong they still kept trying to attack. I feared for my life. So Mike Brown, we've shot him a few times, but, he got shot in the head, and just kept coming, like the Hulk, he's so strong. So this man, Arthur McDuffie, who allegedly is now fallen off of a bike, the helmet is coming off, he's skid on the side of the road, and he's just so empowered and so strong, he got up and decided to attack 10 police officers. That's the story that the police put out. But not so fast, because then when they got into the investigation, there were lots of loopholes in the story. First of all, when we just talk about the motorcycle, the damages to the bike didn't quite match the story that the police were telling. Remember, the police said he was driving, he didn't stop, he fell over, and the bike would skid all down the street. That was supposed to be the damage to the bike, but the damages did not match up. You want to know why? Because the police then decided they were going to beat the bike with their helmets. This is after they've had the 4 hours to figure out their plan, and now they're executing it. So they used McDuffie's helmet to beat the bike. Then they used batons and nightsticks, beat the bike down. Another officer got in the car, drove over the bike. They took the keys from the bike, threw it on the roof at a nearby building and everything else like that. And so nothing quite aligned. And then just to make sure that they got the job done, when the bike was at the impound lot, an officer literally hopped over the fence, snuck inside and beat the bike some more just to make sure that the job was done. All right? And so in that element, things did not quite align or add up. And then you had the medical examiner, a man named Donald Wright, who was like, whoa. The injuries to this man do not align with what y'all said. When it came to the details in regards to the injuries to Arthur McDuffie, the medical examiner said he had the injuries of somebody who would have fallen off of a 5-story building. All right. They beat him so bad, right? One, when they beat him in the back of the head with the nightclubs and the nightsticks, they split his skull open. Secondly, blood was splattered nearly 4 feet away from the body. He was beaten so bad that his facial features were unrecognizable because his head was so swollen. They could not even find this man's neck because that's how swollen he was. His eyes had pretty much popped out, and literally they had to drill bolts into the man's head in order to release the pressure that was around his brain. Pretty much, and this is a quote from the medical examiner, pretty much he died because of the destruction of his underlying brain. That's how bad they beat this man. And just to highlight the lack of transparency that existed within the police department, the chief of police didn't even know about Arthur McDuffie dying for a whole 4 days. He found out from a journalist. The journalist is asking him the questions about Arthur McDuffie, and he, I didn't even know what happened. What? Whoa. oh, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Like, he didn't even know. That's how, when it comes to regulating and making sure that there's any kind of protocol in that police department, it was non-existent. And so anyway, 10 police officers are charged. And the charges vary from, manslaughter, tampering with evidence, all kind of different things. And they decide that they need to move the trial to Tampa, because if we have it in this community of people who are pissed off about what has happened to one of their own, they might not get a fair trial. The police aren't going to get a fair trial. So they move it to Tampa. And understand, Tampa in 1980 at this point is pretty much an all-white city. It's a pretty white town, right? And so the jury is composed of nothing but middle-aged white men. And by the way, when it came to the funeral of Arthur McDuffie, he had an open casket. You see how these things are almost like a cycle? Because this automatically would make you think of Emmett Till, right? And so, he has the open casket funeral. That in itself is sad enough. Just to see the clips of even the mother doing the interview and to hear those kind of cries. It's something that, there's certain sounds you just never forget. But getting back to the trial, what do you think happened? All right? They moved this trial to Tampa, and these 10 officers that are on trial for different various offenses, and, it's an all-white male jury. They literally had this 4-week trial, and they had a verdict ready in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Not guilty. Everybody's free. Nobody was convicted of a single charge. Everybody got off. And then this is where you even see the cycle, because remember when we talked about Ferguson, and remember after it was decided that nothing was going to happen to Darren Wilson, and all of a sudden, I think that was the chief of police or somebody in charge, did that press conference and just talked all this trash about how people overreacted and the hands up don't shoot was some nonsense and blah, 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 blah. And so while you're watching it on one camera angle, you see him giving his speech. On the other camera angle, you see Ferguson going up in flames. It's literally the same thing where now the police officers are talking trash about the trial, how it was a waste of time, how it was all a sham. They're owed an apology, all these different things. And even to see their reactions of them high-fiving and patting each other on the back like they did a good job, where they literally just got off for killing somebody over a red light. Because, okay, people can say, oh, well, he didn't stop. Listen, just to make this point go further, I'm just going to have, for the rest of, the few minutes that I'm on here, well, it might be more than a few minutes, I'm just going to have some footage of white people resisting arrest or fighting the police or doing whatever they don't want to do and living to tell about it. Okay? There's that. And so one of the things that takes place is, of course, this triggers the riot. So May 17th, 1980, it's on and popping in Liberty City. The residents are just tired of it because what happened with that trial just highlights all of the atrocities that have been happening to the people in that community for decades. Everything from being displaced, having to deal with the segregation, having to deal with the over-policing, having to deal with the divestment from the air, like all of that. And so literally people have had enough. And so it makes you wonder, because that's one riot that people don't even remember. That's one that's not even a part of the national conversation anymore. And then what happens when we just go a decade later? Literally almost the same scenario with Rodney King in LA, where again, you talk about the history of the black experience in LA and the nonsense and everything from the Watts riots back in the 60s and all the things that used to take place that worked against black people collectively. You talk about the war on crime coming out of the Nixon era, which translated into the war on drugs from the Reagan era, and how black families in the 80s, the 70s, and 90s dealt with so much nonsense from the LAPD. And now the difference with this situation with Rodney King is we have it on tape. It's on video this time. And also, media has shifted. When everything happened with Arthur McDuffie, CNN was not a network yet. Okay, CNN would literally become a network 1 month after the riot. So when it came to national news and different stories taking place, a lot of times when people would say, this is what's happening, it often did not even make it to the mainstream news, because at that point in time, there were no major news networks. CNN was not a thing. Fox News was not a thing. MSNBC was not a thing. You got your news from ABC, Nightly News, CBS, or NBC, but that was only going to be a 30-minute window of information. So they're trying to cover everything that's happened across the nation. And right now, Mount St. Helens was blowing up, so that's where they need to focus. And so, they have all of these different things taking place. But now with the LAPD and Rodney King, it's on video. So everybody just knows. This man, them 4 officers are going to jail. They have to be. Have to. It's on video, and it's an extended video. If you've ever watched that video, it goes on and on. It ain't just like a 2-second clip with a pop, and that was it. No, they beat this man down. And if you saw what his face looked like when it all was over with, fortunately, he lived at that time. But man, so everybody in LA just knew it's going to be fine. We'll be fine. What happened? They get off. What happens? LA goes up in flames. The people of LA have had enough. They're tired of the nonsense. And when you talk about what happened in both communities, going back to Liberty City, one of the things that also took place is the residents were kind of tired of the interactions with the police, because there had been many instances where police got off and with literally murder. You had a police officer shoot a black man for peeing outside of a warehouse. He put the gun to the man's head, claimed he was just playing, but somehow the trigger went off, killed the man. You had a police officer who stopped a black little girl, molested her, and then got probation. And then never even had he was ordered to pay for the girl's therapy and everything. He skipped town. He skipped town. Oh, and by the way, all the police officers that killed Arthur McDuffie, of course, were reinstated. And so when you look at the parallel and go back to LA, what happened with LA? Remember that black girl that was killed by the Korean store owner because the store owner thought that she was shoplifting and she wasn't, and they literally killed the girl? Like, so you have two communities that are sick of the BS, right? And so people uprise, people revolt, they got to release their anger because they feel like they're being unheard, right? And so when I talk about this cycle, this is what I'm talking about, because you're constantly seeing a cycle repeat itself. And even going back to Liberty City again, you had a teacher, somebody who was trying to do well in the community. The police raided the wrong house, beat the teacher down. The teacher eventually dies from his injuries. Black man, killed him. You know, that's the nonsense that people have been saying. And it's not just a Liberty City or an LA thing. It's all over the country. And that's just the conversation of police brutality.